Hi all, this is just a small update, so if you'd like to go straight to the video, you should see a time on screen that you can skip to, or alternatively, you can find a timestamp in the description. I live in a small, sometimes third world-like country down on the arse end of the globe, New Zealand. We recently lost power at home following a small storm, and it took almost 7 days to get us back on the grid. Sadly, this happens quite often. Ironically, it was right after I released the blackout video. I also live somewhat rurally, so no power means no running water as well. Now, if you can imagine this combined with a wife who is now in her 10th month of pregnancy, it hasn't been a hugely pleasant week or so. So why am I telling you this? I informed a large number of you that the Discord server would be live within a few days. It's now been about 2 weeks, so I apologise for this. Things were a little out of my control. But now I can finally say it's ready, and the link will be in the description. Going back to the overdue pregnant wife thing, I'm not going to be hugely available over the next few weeks, for obvious reasons. But my man Lone Wanderer will be able to sort you out. When you join, write a message in the reception area and he'll be able to hook you up to the rest of the server. I'm not big on Discord, I just really haven't put the time into it, so if you have any questions, please message Wanderer or any of the other mods. As I said, I'm not going to be hugely available over the next few weeks, but most of you that messaged me were solo players after a team. So get in there, mingle, and start teaming up. I'll be seeing you in there soon. Anyway, on to the video. Let's talk weapon talents. With over 50 weapon talents available, it's not as easy as saying which ones are good and which ones are bad. Because of the nature of this game and the vast amount of build options available, some of the worst talents in the game can still be useful in the right situation. The following will be based off the more generic builds, or maybe they just have a wider range of usefulness. But don't let this put you off from trying talents that aren't on this list. Here are all of the weapon talents currently available in the game as of 1.8. Firstly, we'll remove all exotic weapon talents, because they're specific to these weapons only and can't be rolled off anyway. The rest of the weapon talents can be broken down into 3 tiers, Tier 1, 2 and 3. Tier 1 being the most useful and Tier 3 being the least. Now let's remove Tier 2 and 3, because let's face it, if you're watching this video, you want to know about the best talents. But this doesn't mean that the Tier 2 and 3 talents are completely useless. In fact, some niche builds can get some good use out of them. For example, on the console I love using Balanced on my sniper builds. It allows me to be considerably more responsive, allowing me to not just hit targets faster, but also be more effective at medium and even close range. And the combination of talents like Meticulous and Commanding can make for a pretty fun constant tac link solo build. But for the majority of builds, these are certainly not the best use of a weapon slot. Basically what I'm trying to say is don't write off the talents I don't discuss here, they still have their place. But for now, we'll focus on the Tier 1 weapon talents. Ferocious, damage against elite and named enemies is increased by 10%. Destructive, armor destruction value is increased by 15% when using this weapon. These are both top tier PvE talents, but neither are particularly useful in PvP. Ferocious has quite difficult requirements to meet for most builds, so in most situations you'll need to have this rolled into the third slot, the free slot. The third slot on a weapon doesn't require you to meet the stat requirements. Also, on top of increasing weapon damage, these two skills can also increase the damage of certain skills like the BFB Sticky Bomb and Seeker Mines. Deadly, critical hit damage is increased by 15%. Depending on the build and the weapon, this is a fairly decent boost in damage. Best used with builds based around critical hit chance and damage, and with SMGs, which have a native critical hit chance bonus. Responsive, damage is increased by 10% when closer than 10 meters to the target. Useful in both PvE and PvP, but more often than not this is a PvP talent. Most PvP fights end up with agents getting within 10 meters of each other. In PvE, getting this close can often end up with having you quickly downed by the superpowered NPC melee, but there are certain builds like the D3FNC which can take advantage of this. Prepared, damage is increased by 15% when more than 30 meters from the target. Elevated, increase your damage by 10% when elevated more than 1.2 meters above your target. Best used with marksman rifles. In fact, elevated can only be rolled onto a specific marksman rifle, the M700. Personally, I find elevated a little too situational for my taste, but there's a good reason why it's a top tier talent, and I'll go into that soon. Competent. Weapon damage is increased by 10% for 15 seconds after using a skill. This is probably one of my favourite talents. It's best used with a build that has medium to high skill haste. It works well with skill power builds because you're constantly cranking up the skills. But it's also quite useful on a DPS build with skills like Pulse and Booster Shot. Both of these skills are assisting your build with extra damage, and Competent will be adding a further 10% damage every time you use them. Unforgiving. Missing health segments increase your damage. 1 missing segment plus 10%. 2 missing segments plus 25%. Top tier talent in PvP. But it can still be useful in PvE. The burst damage this can give when facing an enemy agent can really turn the fight in your favour. But in PvE it can be a little bit risky to allow your health to get this low. Certain builds like the D3 FNC or Nomads could find this useful, but more often than not there's a better talent to go for. Predatory. Killing a target regenerates 35% health over 20 seconds. Hands down one of the best PvE talents in the game. It doesn't add to your damage output, but it'll help keep you alive. I don't have a single PvE build that doesn't take advantage of this talent. Because of the high stamina requirement, this may need to be rolled into the 3rd slot. Determined. Killing a target reduces skill cooldowns by 7.5%. Like Predatory, Determined isn't going to increase your damage numbers in any way, but the skill cooldown makes it a great addition to any skill power build. But it isn't just skills that it'll help with, it'll also reduce signature skill cooldowns. So for example, when considering how important the recovery link is to solo players, essentially becoming an extra life, this can be quite useful to a number of different build types. Because of the unusual stat requirements, this usually needs to be rolled into the 3rd slot. Talented. Killing a target with this weapon increases your skill power by 15% for 20 seconds. Another great skill power build weapon talent. Because a lot of skill power builds are quite squishy, I mean, they're usually glass cannons in their own right, you really need to get as much damage or utility as possible out of your skills to make up for this. With the right build, this will help get considerably more damage or effectiveness out of your skills. When it comes down to getting the absolute best damage out of your build, there's another step you need to consider. Weapon talents calculate their bonus damage in either a multiplicative or additive way. Basically, multiplicative, as the name suggests, means that damage types are multiplied together, where additive damage types are added. Multiplicative will give you more damage. Over one talent, it may not be a heck of a lot, but over 4 or 5 talents, the numbers really start to show. So which weapon talents are multiplicative and which are additive? Well, apart from the following, which are always multiplicative, responsive, prepared, and elevated, the rest come down to the damage type that they're adding. For example, Ferocious adds 10% damage to elites, and Destructive adds 15% enemy armor damage. These are 2 different damage types, and combined the end damage is calculated multiplicatively, where Destructive with another enemy armor damage piece would be calculated additively. This probably doesn't make a huge amount of sense right now, and I'd love to go into more detail, but instead, when you're ready, I recommend checking out a video from Marco Style, released at the end of last year. He does a brilliant job explaining the difference between additive and multiplicative damage types, and how to get the absolute best damage out of your builds. I'll post a link in the description. I definitely recommend checking this out when you have a chance. Sometimes it's your build that decides what talents you can use. For example, if you are running a firearms heavy build, you'll only be able to unlock talents that require high firearms, like Deadly and Responsive. But this is where the 3rd slot talent comes in, the free slot. This is where you can activate talents that would otherwise be unavailable to your build, giving you greater flexibility and diversity within the weapon talent pool. So with this in mind, and the fact you can re-roll one of the talents on your weapon, you need to look at where the talents are located. For example, let's say you find a lightweight M4 with the talents Determined, Ferocious, and Destructive in the 3rd slot. Although these are all top tier talents, the slot location makes this a fairly average weapon. Destructive is already quite an easy talent to unlock, so it's a bit of a waste being in the 3rd slot. Where Determined and Ferocious have more difficult requirements to unlock, and in most cases you'll find that one or both of these talents will be unavailable to your build. I'll leave you with some good weapon talent examples now. These are based off the typical DPS build, sustainability, and skill power build. Please don't take these as the single best and only option. This is just a starting point, to give you an idea based on the information stated earlier. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. There is certainly a lot more depth we could go into, but for now I think this is a good start. If you need a little more information on anything, just let me know in the comments and I'll try and get back to you. Cheers!